Alright, welcome back. It's been a long time since I've done a lesson on a video, and I really miss you all. And this is the final lesson on the Pythagorean Theorem. We did lesson 23, lesson 24, and lesson 25. 25 talks about how to use the Pythagorean Theorem to find the distance between 2 points using a coordinate grid or graph. The essential question for this lesson is, how can I use my skills in using the Pythagorean Theorem in order to solve problems on a coordinate plane grid? And I realized that I don't have an L in my problems. Anyway, so the first example, and this is a lesson which is best done by just doing examples. How can I find the distance between point A, which is 1, 2, and point C, which is -6, -3? Now the first step is to draw the 2 points and then connect them. So that's what I'm going to do. I will use a red pen. Point A is 1, 2, and I'm going to label that point A. Point C is -6, -3. And I'm going to label that point C. And then I'm going to connect them. Alright, so that's the first step. And this is just a review. Remember, you always do the x coordinate, then the y coordinate. Coordinate points are always, ordered pairs are always listed x and then y. Alright, step 2 would be to draw a right triangle using AC is my hypotenuse. And so I actually have a choice here. I can make a right triangle here, or I can make a right triangle here, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to draw a right triangle. So we have this distance is now the hypotenuse. Alright? So now you might be able to figure out what we're going to do next. We are going to count or find the distance of the legs by counting how many units. So I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units on this leg, and again these are going to be the legs. I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 units here. Well, that's not right. I counted wrong. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Sorry. Even I make mistakes, especially with all of this isolation at home. The point obviously has to go all the way there. I knew I made a mistake. So my legs are going to be 5 and 7, or 7 and 5. Again, when you're doing the Pythagorean Theorem, it doesn't matter which one you use for which leg. So now we're going to use the Pythagorean Theorem to find the distance between points A and point C. So I will call this distance A, and I'll call this distance B, and then my distance between A and C I will call C, or you could use X. So I know that A squared plus B squared equals C squared. A squared is 7 squared is 49. 5 squared is 25. And that equals my hypotenuse squared, which is my distance between these 2 points. 49 plus 25, again you can use a calculator. If I use a calculator I get 74. Alright, and I've already looked this up, but let's go ahead and use a calculator. 74, the square root of 74 is about 8.6. And usually we just ask that you round to the nearest tenth. So to solve for C, remember we do the inverse operation. We take the square root of both sides. We get approximately 8.6. All right, so I could say the distance between point A and point C is about 8.6. All right, so we're using the Pythagorean theorem to find the distance between 2 points. Okay, here is the next example. Find the distance between 3, negative 2, and negative 1, 4. So my first step is to draw the points and connect them. So my first point is 3, negative 2, 1, 2, positive 3, negative 2, and that is point A. Point B is negative 1, positive 4. That's point B. And I'm going to connect them. Okay. And again, I'm going to treat this like my hypotenuse. I will draw a right triangle. I could draw my right triangle here, or I could draw it here. It doesn't matter. Okay. One thing I want to notice is that this horizontal distance is going to be the difference between my x coordinates. Notice that B has a coordinates of negative 1, 4, and A has a coordinates of 3, negative 2. I notice that my x coordinate here is 3 and my x coordinate here is negative 1. And so one thing you might notice is that this difference between 3 and negative 1 will also be how many I count, which is 1, 2, 3, 4. If I took 3 and I subtracted a negative 1, I would get 4, which happens to be my horizontal distance. I'm going to go ahead and use my light blue here. My y's are negative 2 and 4. And when I count, I get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If I was to subtract those y values, I would get negative 2 minus 4. The absolute value of negative 6 is 6. So I counted the distance. I found the distance using counting. I could also find the distance just by subtracting the x coordinates from each other and the y coordinates from each other. Now I'm going to use the Pythagorean theorem to solve. I have a squared plus b squared equals c squared. I will use a as 6 and b 4. And for fun, I'll call this x this time. 6 squared is 36. 4 squared is 16. 36 plus 16 happens to be 52. Once you have x squared, we have to take the square root of both sides. That's the inverse operation. When I take the square root of 52, I get about 7.2. Is about x. So I could say the distance between point A and point B is about 5.2 units. And I should probably say units. Okay. And that is my answer. And up here I probably should have said units as well. Again, that is my answer. I always like to circle my answer, and I realize it's a little messy. Now, we're going to do something fun right now. We're going to talk about how you can use the distance, use the distance between 2 points without actually graphing, okay? And I kind of talked about it a little bit here. If I have, let's say I want to find these distance between point C and point D without graphing, my first step is to identify my x-coordinate, x1 and x2. My x1 is -4, my x2 is 3. If I was to find the distance between those, I would have -4 minus 3. That is the absolute value of -7, or 7. My y values, we'll use red, 5 and 1. The distance between 5 and 1, remember the distance is always going to be a difference. It's the absolute value of 4, or 4 units. And then I would just use the Pythagorean Theorem. So this is a way you can do it without actually graphing, by just finding the difference between the 2 points. My A is 7. I will square that. My B is 4. I square that. 7 squared is 49, plus 4 squared is 16, and then I get 49 plus 16. If I was to use my calculator, I would get 65. To find the square root, I'm going to use the square root, and I get approximately 8.0. We know that the square root of, or actually 8.1. We know the square root of 64 is 8. This rounds up to 8.1. So my distance is approximately 8.1. I hope you've enjoyed this lesson today.